Now, Lil Durk's federal case may have just taken another turn. According to a May 21st court filing from one of Durk's co-defendants, his name is Deandre Wilson, prosecutors told the defense that they were considering adding 2 old incidents into the case, a 2019 shooting and a 2022 Chicago murder. And these aren't small situations either. One of them is a violent Atlanta shooting that Durk was once charged in before the charges were eventually dismissed. The other is a brutal Chicago killing outside a youth peace center, a killing that was caught on surveillance, later described by prosecutors as an alleged murder for hire plot. And this particular murder was actually linked to Durk in court records. However, it's important to note that Durk was actually not charged in any of that, so he's officially not been hit with any new charges on paper yet. Now let's talk a little bit more about this. So according to this court filing by Deandre Wilson, Durk's co-defendant, prosecutors were considering bringing these older situations into the current federal case as direct evidence. Basically, they may be trying to expand the case. Instead of only focusing on the Los Angeles murder for hire plot allegations Durk is currently locked up for, they may try to bring in the Atlanta situation and the Chicago situation, we'll talk about these in a second, to argue that these situations connect to a bigger picture. So before we get into the main update, you have to understand what prosecutors may now be trying to bring into Durk's federal case. Because if they actually move forward with this, Durk's case could get way bigger than the original murder for hire plot charges. But before we get to that, like most of you guys know, Lil Durk is still behind bars on the federal murder for hire case connected to the 2022 shooting that targeted Quando Rondo in Los Angeles, a shooting that ended up killing Quando's cousin, Savia Robinson. And as Durk has been sitting behind bars, we talked about this, but he made a statement about wanting to save the generation, or should I say the new generation. He talked about how the younger generation needs guidance, how the cycle of violence needs to stop, and how he wants to be a part of helping people make better decisions before it's too late. Now, aside from that, as Durk, who's been locked up for a while at this point, ever since 2024, on some very serious charges, his case is still moving forward. And honestly, this recent update is it's looking scary, okay? So recently there's been a major update in the case. The other day, a motion was filed by Deandre Wilson. He's one of Durk's co-defendants. And just to be clear, Wilson is not some random person on the outside. He is one of the people charged alongside Durk in this federal case. So when his lawyer files something in court, sometimes those filings can reveal details about where the overall case is headed. Now, this wasn't Durk's own motion. This was Wilson asking the court to reconsider his detention and possibly let him out on bond. But inside that motion, Wilson's lawyer revealed something important. According to this filing, the government informed the defense counsel that it was considering filing supplemental charges by June 3rd, 2026. So that's pretty soon, right? And those possible charges would bring in 2 additional alleged incidents as direct evidence, a 2022 Chicago incident and a 2019 Atlanta incident, which was also a shooting. The 2022 one resulted in the death of another person, so that was a murder. Now I want to read the wording from the filing because this is the part that makes the update very serious. And this is what it says. On May 13, 2026, the government informed defense counsel that it is considering seeking supplemental charges that would charge the Chicago 2022 incident and an incident from 2019 in Atlanta as direct evidence in this case. So this is not just somebody online saying, oh, they might bring up old stuff. According to Wilson's lawyer, prosecutors informed the defense that they were considering bringing in these 2 incidents into the case as direct evidence. And then the filing says something else that matters. It says the government has now signaled its intention to bring both the Chicago incident and a previously unproposed Atlanta 2019 incident into this case as direct evidence. Neither involves Mr. Wilson. And that last line is really the whole reason Wilson's lawyer is bringing this up. Neither involves Mr. Wilson. So from Wilson's perspective, his co-defendant, he's saying, why should I sit in jail longer while the government adds new allegations into the case that don't involve me? And honestly, from his point of view, I guess you can kind of understand why his lawyer is making this argument right here. Because imagine you're sitting in jail for over a year waiting for a trial. And then right before the trial is supposed to happen, prosecutors start talking about adding old incidents that your lawyer says don't even involve you. You know, I guess it kind of makes sense, right? So now the trial might actually get delayed again. And now your lawyer might have to prepare for evidence connected to situations you allegedly weren't even a part of. Now your name is sitting next to a bigger case. Durk's name is all we care about in this situation, honestly. Even if the new allegations are aimed more at somebody else. And that's why his lawyer is basically saying, hold on, if the government is trying to expand this case with incidents that don't involve my client, why should my client stay locked up while everybody else fights over that? So even though this is not Durk's motion, it accidentally gives us a major window into what prosecutors may be planning next. But for Durk, this is where the situation could get worse. Because if prosecutors actually decide to bring those incidents into the case as direct evidence, this case becomes bigger. and way worse for him. More discovery, more investigation, and possibly even more delays. And the key phrase here is direct evidence, because there's a big difference between people on the internet bringing up old situations and prosecutors trying to bring those situations into a federal case as direct evidence. So the internet rumors are one thing, a court filing is different. But before we talk about any of that, we have to understand what these two situations they're trying to bring in actually are. So let's talk a little more about these specific situations, because one of the incidents mentioned in the court filing is a 2019 situation out of Atlanta. And to understand that one, we got to go back to February 2019. This was just a few days after the Super Bowl, and there was a shooting outside the Varsity, which is a pretty well-known restaurant in Midtown Atlanta. According to initial reports at the time, police said a 23-year-old man was shot multiple times around 5:45 in the morning near Spring Street and North Avenue. This wasn't just a quiet back street. This was right in front of the Varsity in a busy area, and the shooting was serious enough that the police had to block off the road for hours while they investigated. The victim was taken to Atlanta Medical Center in serious condition, and investigators said there were multiple shell casings found at the scene. At least 18 bullets were reportedly fired. Witnesses who were nearby described the whole scene like chaos. One person said they were standing right there and almost got hit by a bullet. Another person who was inside a nearby cigar bar once the gunshot started said people got down and waited for the gunfire to stop. So at first, this was reported as a violent shooting outside a popular Atlanta restaurant, but a few months later, Durk's name got attached to it. In May 2019, reports came out that Lil Durk had turned himself into police in connection with that shooting. His attorney confirmed that Durk surrendered, and Durk himself spoke publicly before turning himself in.
You're about to surrender as we speak.
Yeah.
How come?
Because I have nothing to hide. Like, I have nothing to run from. We found out we had a warrant. We was actually on tour. Once I heard, I immediately came back. We immediately canceled the tour.
He's got a multi-million-dollar salary music career going.
Did you do it? Did you shoot this man? Did you commit the other crimes of which you're accused?
No.
And the way Durk framed it at the time was basically, I'm not running from anything. He said, I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to run from. Now, even though Durk was saying he had nothing to hide, the case itself was still extremely serious, because a while later, Durk appeared in court, and a judge ruled there was enough evidence for the case to move forward. According to the report, police said they used surveillance footage from multiple cameras in that area, including nearby businesses, to build their case against Durk and his co-defendant, which at the time was King Von. And investigators alleged that Durk, King Von, the victim, and others had been together earlier that night, and then they eventually ended up near this restaurant, the Varsity. That's where the victim, his name is Alexander Witherspoon, he claimed he was robbed and shot. According to the report, he said his chain was snatched off his neck, $30,000 was stolen from him, and the vehicle he was driving was also taken.
The victim, Banks, Bennett, and others went to a nightclub, a gas station, and ended up in the parking lot of the Varsity. That's when Witherspoon said he was robbed and shot.
He said his chain was snatched off his neck, and he had $30,000 stolen from him, and they stole the vehicle he was driving.
Police say Banks was seen on tape shooting a gun.
You see Mr. Banks' arm out the window firing several shots at the victim, towards the victim.
According to the reports, Durk said he canceled his tour and flew to Atlanta after finding out he was wanted by police. Durk was reportedly facing charges including criminal attempt to commit murder, aggravated assault, gang-related charges, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. So police were not saying Durk was around when something happened. They were alleging he was involved in a robbery and shooting, and they claimed they had video evidence connected to it. Durk's side, of course, pushed back. His attorney called it a celebrity witch hunt and argued that if Durk wasn't famous, this would have been treated much differently. And then the police claimed Durk was seen firing shots. So the prosecution was basically trying to make it way bigger than just a shooting. They were trying to bring in gang activity into it, putting a Chicago detective on a stand to testify about Durk's and Vaughn's involvement as far as gang ties. So at the time, the case was moving forward on very serious allegations. However, years later in October 2022, the charges were eventually dropped. Durk's lawyer gave a statement saying it took 3 years for the state to make the right decision, but in the end, the right decision was made and Durk could finally put the situation behind him. And for a while, that's what it looked like. From the outside looking in, this Atlanta shooting situation looked like an old case that came, dragged on for years, and eventually went away. But now, according to this new filing, prosecutors in the federal case are allegedly considering bringing that 2019 Atlanta incident back into the conversation. And that's why this update is so important, because the issue is not that Durk was newly charged today for the Atlanta shooting. That's not what we're saying. What the filing says is that prosecutors informed the defense counsel that they were considering supplemental charges, so basically adding this on top of the main charges. So something Durk probably thought was behind him could now become relevant again in a completely different case. So that's where the situation gets really serious. And I'll be honest, this part I really don't understand, because if the Atlanta charges were dropped back in 2022, the obvious question is, how can prosecutors now try to bring that same situation into a whole different federal case. But from what it looks like, they may not be saying we're reopening the exact same state case, the same way it existed before. It looks more like they're trying to use that old incident as part of a bigger federal theory. Basically, they may be trying to argue that even though the old Atlanta case was dismissed, the incident itself still matters because it helps explain a pattern, motive, or relationship between certain people. I'm assuming they're probably gonna try to bring in the whole he's a gang member argument. So I guess from the prosecution side, they may argue we're not bringing this back for no reason. We're bringing it back because it connects to a larger story we're trying to prove. And that's where things could get very interesting. Now, let's also touch on the other situation prosecutors are allegedly trying to bring into this case. And this happened in January of 2022. Now, this particular situation is very interesting because when you look at it, it sounds very similar to the type of allegations Durk is currently locked up behind right now. So let's go way back to January 27, 2022. A man was fatally shot and another man was wounded after walking out the Youth Peace Center of Roseland in Chicago. And this didn't happen at night in some hidden location where nobody could see anything. This actually happened in broad daylight. The victim was 24-year-old Stephon Mack. Now, before we go any further, we need to slow down and explain why Stephon Mack's name even matters in this story. Because according to later reporting in court records, Mack wasn't just described as a random person who was killed in Chicago. Federal investigators describe him as the leader of the Smashville faction of the Gangster Disciples. And for anyone, all the regular folks who don't understand what that means, a faction is basically a smaller crew or branch inside a bigger gang. So instead of looking at the Gangster Disciples like one giant group where everybody is moving the same way, in reality, you have different neighborhoods, different crews, different factions. That's what they call them, in different internal politics. So that detail matters because investigators later connected this whole situation back to another tragedy in Durk's life. In June 2021, Durk's brother Dante Banks Jr., better known as D-Thang, was shot and killed outside a nightclub in Harvey, Illinois. And the death came less than a year after Durk had already lost King Von. So at that point, Durk wasn't just dealing with one loss. He was dealing with back-to-back deaths of people who were extremely close to him. And according to court documents reported by the Chicago Tribune, investigators believe D-Thang's killing was connected to another Gangster Disciples faction that had ties to Smashville. So now you can see why federal investigators may have been looking at Stephon Mack differently. If they believe D-Thang's killing was connected to a faction with ties to Smashville, and Mack was allegedly the leader of this Smashville gang, then from the government's perspective, Mack's death starts looking less like a random shooting and more like something that could be connected to retaliation. And this is where the allegation gets serious. Because in an April 2023 warrant application, a federal agent wrote that Lil Durk was and still is offering money for people to kill those responsible for his brother's murder. And more specifically, was allegedly offering money for any gangster disciple that was killed. Now, obviously, this is the government's allegation. Durk has not been charged in Stephon Mack's death, and as far as public reporting shows, nobody has been publicly charged for killing D-Thang either. But this is the connection investigators were allegedly making. D-Thang gets killed in 2021. Investigators believe the people connected to that killing had ties to Smashville. Then in 2022, Stephon Mack, who investigators describe as the leader of Smashville, gets killed outside a youth center. And later, investigators starts looking at whether Mack's killing was connected to money allegedly being offered for retaliation. So now that you understand why Stephon Mack's name matters in this story, let's talk about what actually happened to him. Because on January 27, 2022, he was walking out of a youth peace center in Chicago. That's when two gunmen get out of a dark-colored Chrysler 300 and open fire. Mack was shot in the head and chest, and he later died in the hospital. A 40-year-old security guard who worked at the youth center was also hit in the leg, but he survived. And the crazy part is, all this was captured on surveillance. Now, after this happened, the case went quiet for a while, at least publicly, because you already know how law enforcement moves. A lot of times it looks like nothing is happening on the outside, but behind the scenes, they're building the case piece by piece. And then eventually in December 2023, federal prosecutors announced that the two men had been indicted in connection with Mack's killing. Now, these two men were Anthony Montgomery Wilson was the first guy, and then Preston Powell. Prosecutors accused them of conspiring with others to kill Stephon Mack in exchange for money. In other words, the government were saying that this was a murder for hire plot, which is obviously important because that's the same type of allegation Durk is currently fighting in the Los Angeles federal case. These guys were eventually charged with conspiracy to use an interstate facility in the commission of murder. They were also charged with murder for hire itself, and then one of them was additionally hit with firearm charges. So at this point, this was already a serious murder for hire case on its own. But then Durk's name started getting pulled into the conversation. Around 2 months after Durk was arrested in 2024, reports came out saying federal investigators had linked him to this Chicago murder. It was reported that Durk could be connected to what they described as a second murder for hire plot This time it involved the killing of Stephon Mack outside this youth peace center. Very ironic that it's called a youth peace center and there was no peace to be seen in this footage right here. Investigators allegedly connected the men charged in Mack's murder to Durk through things like text messages and confidential informants.
Prosecutors say Mack was outside the Youth Peace Center of Roseland when he was gunned down. The FBI linked the two men charged with Mack's murder to Durk using texts and confidential informants. The feds believe this murder was revenge for the death of Lil Durk's brother.
Now, to be clear, Durk has not been charged in Stephon Mack's death. That part is very important. But what prosecutors were allegedly saying is that this Chicago situation may be connected to Durk in some way. And when you take a step back and look at it, you can understand why this is such a big deal. Because this is not some random old street rumor being brought up online. Like, this was all documented. And so this is the incident that prosecutors previously tried to bring into Durk's federal case as evidence. Then they withdrew it. And now, according to Deandre Wilson's recent filing, the government is allegedly considering bringing the same Chicago incident back into the case as direct evidence. And that's where the case could get even more serious. Because if prosecutors actually move forward with that, they're not just talking about the original Los Angeles murder for hire allegations anymore. They would be trying to bring in another alleged murder for hire situation. So the allegations are very similar to the main case Durk is already fighting here. The LA case is about an alleged murder for hire plot. And then the Chicago situation is also described the same way. Again, Durk has not been charged in any of this, but it looks like the prosecution has plans of using this now. So if they actually end up moving forward with this, it could change the entire timeline of the case. And that's something I've been thinking about, because when you look at the case from the outside, the question always becomes, what do they actually have? Not what do they claim they have, not what sounds crazy in a headline, but what can they actually prove in court? Because one way to look at it is this. Maybe they're trying to bring in these additional incidents because they believe it shows a pattern. Maybe they're trying to paint a bigger picture for the jury, because that obviously matters. Like, instead of looking at the LA case as one isolated incident, they may be trying to say, no, this is part of something bigger. This is how this alleged operation moved. This is how they essentially used their operation and their power and their money. This is how violence allegedly got carried out. But at the same time, another question that's fair is this. If the main case is already that strong, why do they need to bring in a 2019 Atlanta situation, which was dismissed, and then this Chicago murder? Does that mean that the original charges aren't as clean as they want them to be, or they just aren't as strong as they would like that to be? Or is this the prosecution trying to throw everything into one big pot and create the strongest possible picture against Durk? Because that's really what it feels like to me. Old cases, new charges, alleged patterns, direct evidence, supplemental charges, co-defendants arguing they had nothing to do with those incidents right there. It's almost like everything is being poured into one big pot, and the government is trying to cook up a much bigger case than the one Durk was originally arrested on. And that's why this update matters, because if they actually move forward with these charges right here, then the case is no longer just about what allegedly happened in Los Angeles. Now the question becomes, how much more are prosecutors trying to attach to Durk? And more importantly, will they actually be able to prove it? And I want to be clear about something. Once again, this doesn't mean that Durk is automatically guilty. None of this means that they're going to be able to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. And none of this means these supplemental charges are guaranteed to happen. But what it does mean is that this case may have entered a different stage now. So to me, it looks like the government is essentially trying to make a narrative stick about Durk's character here. If they can convince a jury that the LA case, the Atlanta situation, and the Chicago situation all fit into one bigger pattern, then Durk's defense team is going to have a much harder fight on their hands. But at the same time, the defense can argue the opposite. They can say that prosecutors are trying to distract from the actual charges by bringing in old situations. So now the real question is not, did Durk do what they accused him of doing in Los Angeles? The bigger question is, how much of this extra stuff will the judge even allow prosecutors to bring into the courtroom? And that right there could change everything. I'm really curious to see what comes out of this Durk situation, because from the outside looking in, he's in a very tight position. On one hand, they're trying to build a much bigger picture around him, not just the LA case, but Atlanta, Chicago, alleged retaliation, alleged money, all these alleged patterns, and all these different pieces that they may try to connect together. But on the other hand, the government still has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's the part people can't forget. Some of this might sound crazy. An allegation can sound insane. A headline can make it seem like everything is already over, but in court, prosecutors still have to prove what they're saying. And Durk has resources, he has money, he has access to high-level lawyers. So this is not going to be one of those situations where the government just says something and nobody pushes back. His defense team is most likely going to fight with everything that they have. the evidence, the old incidents, the way they're trying to frame this entire case, and whether some of this stuff should even be allowed in front of a jury. But with that being said, if the government can actually prove what they're alleging, then the situation is beyond serious. Because at this point, this wouldn't just be about a rapper getting caught up in rumors or old street stories. It would be about the government trying to show that multiple violent incidents across multiple cities were allegedly connected to the same bigger pattern. And that's why this update, but this case is so important. Because right now, Durk's future may come down to two things: what they can prove and what the judge allows them to bring into court. If you made it this far, drop a like on this video, and of course, subscribe if you're new here. I'm very curious what you guys think about this Lil Durk update. It's looking like things are getting pretty bad, but we'll find out very soon what happens. And of course, I'll keep you guys updated. Y'all let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace, I'm out.